I'm going to be starting to work with Castor with a rope. So I'm just going to ask him to come over to me here. I had given him a treat on the other side, he just couldn't see it. And he's coming over to my hand target quite nicely. He's engaging with me when I ask. He's lining up here. I didn't ask, but he's offering things, so he's engaged. I like that. Just do a little bit of a review of some petting, and then we're going to work with the rope a little bit. And I try to be as progressive as I can without being too fast. Here's the rope. It's just a lead rope that came cut shorter than it's supposed to be. I'm not really sure why, but it's really stiff and it's short, so I like that. I'm just going to have him start out by targeting it. There we go. When he touches it, or even if he doesn't touch it. In the very beginning, if he just looks at it or looks the direction of it, I'm going to go ahead and click and reward. Castor's pretty brave, so I'm okay with him just going ahead and touching it. If you have a horse that's a lot more fearful, then I would go ahead with just him looking at it and build up from there. See, it's a little scarier when it goes over the panel. So he was still really good, and I'm going to give him a really high rate of reinforcement because I want that rope to be really positive. Ropes can be really scary really quickly, especially when you're using negative reinforcement. So I want him to not think that ropes are scary. I want him to follow the rope, touch the rope, want to put the rope on his body to earn a reward. The complete opposite of traditional training. So very nice. I like this rope. It's not too long. It doesn't move a whole lot because it is really old, so it's perfect. And then when I start leading, I'll be using this so they could drag something, but it's not super long and scary. It's not going to get tangled in their legs because it's very stiff. There, he's trying to touch it on his own. That's perfect. That's great. And then later on, when I'm trying to do some tying and stuff like that, it just works really well. It works out well. So I definitely recommend just getting an old junky lead rope from a yard sale or something and using that because this works great. So, and my plan is to put the rope loop over his head or just like hold it in half and have him put his head underneath it. And I didn't want all that extra length, so this really worked out well. But I want him to be interested in it. I'm also going to let it kind of make noise on this panel gate. The snap can bang around a little bit. I would be careful though in the beginning if your horse is really worried about that. You might have to do a completely different session or break it way down to incorporate the sound in there if that's something that's really triggering to your horse. So here I've unfurled it. I had it kind of folded over and now I've just folded it just in half once and he seems to be fine with it. He's generalizing pretty well. Again, that just depends on the horse. So I'm trying to go progressively toward this loop because my goal here is that he sticks his head underneath that. So it would be mimicking like putting on a halter or putting the reins over his head or just putting the lead rope over his neck to put the halter on, something like that. So I really want to get him used to that before I go super into detail with the haltering or try to think about putting a bridle on, things like that. Or just handling. I really want him to get used to the rope and want the rope to be near him and not be afraid of it chasing him because we get a lot of problems with that. That's nice. I'll take that. So I'm just moving it a little bit closer to the center of his face so that my hand's kind of like right on the bridge of his nose and then either side, or the rope is on either side of his face. So he's got to see it out of both eyes. But I do want it to be more of I'm holding it out and he comes and puts his face there versus he holds still and I put it there. That's going to be the end goal, but in the beginning, I really want it to be his choice. I want him to come to it. I don't want to not necessarily be forcing, but I really want him to come to it. They're going to build a lot more confidence and control over it if they move their face toward it. And that's with anything really. There it kind of just brushed his nostril there. That's perfect. I'm just going a little bit further up his face. So just like everything else, getting him used to this equipment is just step by step. There he's bringing his face toward me, so go ahead and put the rope on him there. I just want to do everything in little steps so that he's not afraid. Like, I don't want to, even if it's just this simple task of me putting the rope over his neck, that could be terrifying for him. And I really don't want to go backwards and I really don't want him to shut down and just kind of let me do whatever because those horses are not safe horses. Those horses are going to explode at some point. So there he's engaging with me. He actually dropped the hay that he had in his mouth because he kind of wanted to sniff me. He is that curious, so that's nice. But yeah, I don't I it might sound stupid or like it's just a small thing, like just put the rope over his neck, but there's a lot of things that go into it because he's building up his confidence. He's building his trust in me. He's learning about ropes. He's knowing that I'm not going to go too fast for him. And all of this just builds on itself. Like right now it seems or he got a little scared. I just asked him to back up and he was a little afraid, but I probably could have done that a little bit softer and lighter, but I want him to just build up that confidence, and it's very important that I don't just go and jump into things that you would with a normal horse. Even some normal horses are afraid, so there he's a little jumpy after that. I probably should have used quite that much pressure to ask him to back up, but I needed his space slightly further away from the gate to put the rope on. So it might not seem like a big deal to you, but it could be a big deal to your horse, and that is just magnified when you have a Mustang. Like, you really get to see the little tiny details that a horse is worried about. They will tell you, some domestic horses will tell you, they tend to more subtly just because they're more just desensitized to human life in general. So the Mustang will really be like, "Holy crap, this is scary," and you're like, what are you even doing?" And you have to figure out those details. It just makes you a better trainer, really. So we'll hold it out, and then a little bit further up the nose, and let it kind of drag down a little bit, because that's what's going to happen once I actually put it over his face. And he's doing pretty well. Like, he's staying there. He's not shut down. He's chewing. His ears are moving. He went a little bit further from the gate, but that was because I asked him to back up. So overall, not too bad. Do want to give him a moment to chew and then offer the rope again. He kind of put his nose in there a little bit. In the beginning, it's going to be a little bit of him going toward it and me kind of putting it toward him. It's going to be a lot of reading your horse, because if he's super fearful, you shouldn't be bringing it toward him at all. If he's curious, like Castor is here on this day, then yes, I'm going to bring it and I'll kind of just meet him in the middle a little bit, just like I did with the petting. But you gotta recognize if your horse is worried, because then it's gonna make things worse. You need to break it down and let them come to it. They're gonna have to target it. You're not gonna be able to close that gap at all because they have that fear. So that's just really important details to look at when you're doing some training. So like here, he's already putting his nose there. He's not leaning away. He's not snorting. He's got a little tension in there, but he's not showing a ton, so I need to be careful about getting too close to him with it. But it's important I give him some pauses where he can stand and chew. I do want him to be constantly reinforced, especially since he's in protective contact inside the pasture where he could just leave at any moment. So I want it to be super rewarding. But I do want to give him a moment to chew. That was really nice because he's bringing his head over to the left here. That's perfect. I would be a little wary if maybe your horse is keeping his head straight and not interacting with the rope at all. Or definitely would be worried if he's turning his head away, because he's thinking about leaving at that point. So I'd kind of reevaluate where you are if they start doing that. That was really nice. I'd probably like a little bit more engagement, but he stood nicely for it, so we'll take it. And the standing and chewing sounds really boring, and it is. Um, but it's really important. That looked really great. And once you get the concept on the video, yeah, you don't have to watch the whole entire video, but I feel like I do okay with, okay, this is enough of the video. You get the gist of it. We're still doing it on other videos that I'm just not going to do because they're the same, but I am practicing this. But when you are working with your horse, it is really important where they have that time to stand next to you. And for domestic horse, it's to stand next to you and go back to that relaxation. A lot of them tend to be more overexcited, and now my Mustangs will be, kind of tend to go that way. But in the beginning, with any feral horse, they see he's tilting his head to the right there, so I take it away. So I noticed that, and I took it away, and then he stood there and had it go up his face. So that's the little differences that you got to look for. But the Mustangs in general needed that time for me to stand next to them and kind of be desensitized to my presence and kind of associate me with food as well. So it's not as much relaxation as far as they're in that seeking mode and they're doing things and they need to come back and relax for a second, like with the domestic horses. It's more of a desensitizing practice for them. They need to be okay with me hanging out next to them. And that's a really big, important part of taming them in the beginning or gentling them is just hanging out with them, hand feeding them, hand grazing them, just being near them and just spending time with them is really important. Really, all horses, but especially them. They Mustangs magnetize everything, magnify everything. Every little training thing that you thought you knew you were doing, or a little detail that you didn't pay attention to, you will now. So they're definitely going to be more difficult and challenging, but definitely worth it if you're up to that kind of challenge. So I'm gonna let him hang out a little bit more. I'm gonna see if he'll kind of come up to. There we go. And so I kind of met him halfway there. That was a good example of that. He kind of brought his nose to the left, and then I brought it up a little bit higher, and he did that well. So he's kind of bringing his head to the right there. There we go. Probably could have been a little slower there because he kind of went to the right like he was going to look away and then went to the left, so I shouldn't move it quite as much. And you'll see with Atlas, I do the same exercise and he responds differently. This is good though. I like that he's getting closer. He might be saying maybe he wants to do like the petting, but at least he's not moving away. He might be like wanting to do another exercise that he's more comfortable with, so I kind of have to take that into account. Maybe he's not comfortable with this, and maybe I could take a break at this point, but he's not leaning away, he's not looking away, he's not actually walking away. So those are all good signs. That looks really nice. But you really want to stop and notice before your horse leaves. Just in any situation, especially if you have a setup like this. This was a little bit different just because of since they're Mustangs, but you definitely want to pay attention. This is really good. I like that he's investigating the rope on his own. That's perfect. He's putting it on his face on his own. That's great. You want to make sure that you're getting their attention and that you're going at a good pace for them when you're doing this so that the horse isn't leaving. So, like, I notice when he's just kind of looking away, he might do a bigger head turn away. Those are your indicators. Like, he's thinking, like, this is either too much, or maybe if we're doing another exercise, he might just be bored. So you kind of have to read that, and then you get that lean away, and then usually after that, you get the walk away. Sometimes you just get the walk away on its own. So it kind of depends on your horse, but definitely try to pay attention to those little things, those little hesitations when you ask them to do something or interact with something. Those are all kind of building toward the I don't really want to be here, I don't really want to do this anymore, or this scares me, I want to leave kind of thing. So you definitely want to pay attention to all of those. That looks great. He seems to be handling his ears being touched really well as well. Sometimes they're a little finicky about that. Castor can be. He was kind of in the beginning with just like my hands like holding it because he had like a tick in his ear at one point, which we got figured out, but he didn't love that. So we definitely want to make sure that even if they're not something hasn't happened to them before, that they still might be weary about their ears. So here he's kind of like, eh. This is another sign that I should have mentioned earlier is that he's just not taking the treats anymore. So he might be starting to get at threshold, starting to get worried. He might just be getting bored. It might be too much for him. So they might need a break. They might need to change to a different lesson, something like that. Maybe the reinforcer isn't high enough value. It's something's going on. He's telling you something. And Castor did that a lot. And I think he got a little bit of. Sometimes he'll be like, "This is too much," and he'll stop taking the food. I think at this point he just the hay wasn't as reinforcing there. He kind of scared himself. He kind of went to target my hand and then saw the rope out of his other eye and got a little afraid. And that's okay because yeah, sometimes they leave without doing those other body language things. I'm not too worried about that. I try to prevent the leaving. Sometimes it happens. I'm more worried about them coming back, and he came back nicely. So that's really, really good. So make sure you have the lowest value reinforcer that works for your horse to participate. Because the higher value, the more, not necessarily energy, but interest, and it comes with a lot of energy and excitement, and other things can go along with it. So like in the beginning when I was doing the training with the halter and stuff and I had grain, and he was conflicted because he wanted the grain but he didn't want to interact with the halter, and it was just too much. You get too much, I guess energy would be a good word, too much stuff. You got too much excitement, too much anxiety, there's just too much. So I want whatever he's willing to work for that behavior without having that energy in there. So right now he's got Timothy hay. He looks like he might need like a Timothy pellet or Timothy mixed with alfalfa, something like that. And that's what he works with now really well. So it just kind of depends on the horse, and then sometimes it depends on the exercise or the day, and there's lots of different factors. I stick to mostly Timothy pellets, and then I also have Timothy alfalfa cubes mixed, and then just Timothy cubes. So that kind of depends. And then some specific things I'll use grain with, and then it just kind of depends on the horse and then the task as well. So, but I really like to stick with the Timothy hay. That works the best. So. After him being a little bit scared, he's not as close. I'm okay with that. I wanted to work on just a different angle. I want him to see me out of that right eye a little bit. It is important that he sees me in the front and then from both sides with this lesson. So just make sure that you're doing it from different angles. And that could only be for certain horses maybe a couple times on in different angles, just so they know that you could be standing in a different place while that exercise happens. But that's important. So. And then sometimes with Castor, he would just have like certain parts of the hay. I'll just stick like a hay flake in this bag that he just didn't want to eat. And so I'll just kind of throw it on the ground and try a different piece, and then he can get it afterwards. So that might work too. And then it kind of depends on the quality of the hay, of the load that I ended up with. Sometimes he'll work for like the greener, nicer stuff, and then not for the other stuff. So it just kind of depends. But there's lots of little details that go into it. So that looks great. And I wouldn't worry necessarily about getting that rope over his ears and on his neck. Like that, yes, that's the goal, but the goal is to do it while the horse remains relaxed and that he wants to participate. So if you're just worried about that and he doesn't want to participate or he's not relaxed anymore, then it doesn't matter. I also like that he's keeping his head still when I take it down and off of him. That some anxiety could come out there where he's just anticipating it coming off and he kind of pulls his head away. So that's another thing to watch out for. There, that was nice. I lifted it up and he went to go put his face in it. That's great. He's staying nice and relaxed. His top line looks great. His neck's nice and level. His ears are moving, but they're not tight. That looks really good. Like he's kind of turning, I think he's just turning over here to see me out of that eye. I don't think this is necessarily like turning to leave, but I do like that he is turning his head back and participating. So that's really great. Yeah, he looks really nice and relaxed. I would definitely in the beginning take the rope off every time and build up to where you leave it on their neck and then feed them a treat, because there's a little bit of duration that you need there. So I wouldn't just start that in the beginning. But this is with a Mustang. So a domestic horse like my quarter horse, I can just put a rope on and it doesn't matter. But I would just kind of read the situation and see what your horse needs. So it just depends. Yeah, that's perfect because he stepped toward it too and toward me. That's wonderful. I'm really happy with that lesson. It didn't look like a whole lot, but he was engaged, he was relaxed, he wanted to interact with the rope. There, like he wants to touch it again. The targeting really helps for sure. Anything scary, just anything at all, really, the targeting helps with. So that's fantastic. I'm just going to end him here. He's being great. That's a great lesson for him.